Hey there, truth seekers. Welcome to Star Kittens Media, where we discuss 13 sign astrology. Today we are talking about the Scorpio full moon occurring at 1:54 a.m. here in New Zealand on Friday, 24th of May, which is 9:54 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. There is lots of beautiful conjunctions with feminine archetypes. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let us know in the comments your biggest takeaway. Hello everyone, thank you for taking your time out of your busy lives to listen to our interpretation of what's happening in the night sky, or in the day sky, since it's daytime here now and nighttime for you in Europe and the United States. My name is Sana and joining me is David. Hello.
Hello.
So Scorpio full moon. That's quite a rare thing, since Scorpio only is 7 degrees. Interesting energies. I'll let you give us some cliff notes of what we are talking about today.
Yeah, firstly, super excited about today because Scorpio, as you say, is 7 degrees, and so therefore it's quite rare that the sun or the moon spends any time in there at all, but be that as it may, for today's reading, for me, Scorpio is the sign that holds the answers to our deepest existential questions. And when the moon, as she is, paired up with Lilith, it makes it even more interesting. So we'll talk about that because not many astrologers talk about Lilith. And of course, on the other side of the full moon is a conjunction between the sun and Sedna, so we'll touch on her as well. I'd say just right off the bat, anytime that there's a moon opposition to the sun, we are dealing with tension normally, what many would say is a sort of a tussle between the head and the heart, will and emotion, if you like, push and pull between those two energies, between the masculine and the feminine polarities of darkness and light. And the key overall with any full moon is to find the balance, is to take both sides and both energies and to work out kind of a third way. So we keep that in mind. With the moon in mysterious Scorpio in a conjunction with the asteroid Lilith and Pallas Athena as well, and we'll touch on that conjunction. But overall, there's really a strong, in fact, I wouldn't even say strong, it's a very strong feminine energies coming through the right side of our reality, i.e. our dreams, our creativity, our intuition. And the sun conjunct with Sedna and Taurus on the other side is relating to Earth. So it's a very grounded energy and our resources, our use of resources. In this case, the sea's resources, and we've got a little story to tell about Sedna, the myth of Sedna. And we will touch also on the sun trine to Pluto and Capricorn, which raises issues of personal and collective power struggles.
So let's start with Scorpio, and Scorpio is quite interesting for both you and I, because before you found out about 13 sign astrology and the true position of the planetary bodies, you went through life believing that your sun was in Scorpio. That never really fitted. And for the first part of my life, I thought that I had my rising sign as Sagittarius, and a lot of things in my life, I'm like, oh, there's the Sagittarian in me. But it turns out that my rising sign is actually Scorpio. So we've done a swapsy. But Scorpio is definitely an energy that I'm familiar with, the deeps and the highs of life, the roller coaster that I call it. How do you see the full moon at this time with the Scorpion energy?
Yeah, well, just picking up before we touch on that about the Scorpio energy, certainly under the 13 sign system, yes, I turned out to be not a Scorpio sun, but a Libra. And that's quite common when casting a 13 sign chart. And so that was a huge revelation to me as somebody who'd studied astrology from, probably aged 9 or 10, consistently had used it as a process to help me understand life's events and what was happening. And so the Scorpio energy was one that I lived, as much as I could for 30 years before I discovered 13 sign astrology. So yeah, it's a very interesting one. And of course, when we're talking 13 sign, as you mentioned right at the outset, because it's a small constellation, in fact, it's the smallest of the 13. The sun only, in fact, spends 7 days. Sun travels at about 1 degree per day. So the sun spends 7 days there. And in fact, the moon will only, because she moves even faster, will only be in this constellation of Scorpio literally for a few hours. She moves at about 2 degrees per hour. So with that in mind, it's a fleeting energy. I have to say that sort of straight up front, is because the moon moves so quickly and Scorpio is so small. This will be a fleeting experience. However, Scorpio as such, in our view, represents deep space and deep ocean as metaphors, if you like, for the exploration of our individual and collective unconscious. When you think about deep space and deep ocean, these are frontiers to humans in many respects, but they represent, as I said, as a metaphor or an analogy of the outer limits of human knowledge, which therefore, anytime we're pushing into that sort of frontiers and those outer limits, can be intense and demanding. So that's an energy that is consistent with a Scorpio full moon. Of course, the exploration of deep space or deep ocean requires special equipment, if you will, unmanned submersibles or deep space probes, which again are metaphors of the tools that are required to expand and evolve our consciousness and to develop our emotional and psychic and intuitive capabilities. We need to travel through our mind's eye, and we need to use our imagination, imagineering, I call it, a creative visualization. And when we're dealing with Scorpio, I believe that we're actually dealing with that pre-manifestation plane, the causal planes. We're not dealing with the physical planes of the 3D reality. We're dealing with that pre-manifestation plane. And of course, Scorpio is, as a sign, in all the research I've done over the last 40 years, I've found that Scorpio, I think, there's a few signs have more than one avatar, but certainly Scorpio has 3 sort of distinct avatars or archetypes. There's the scorpion itself, the insect, the creature, which represents the unevolved ego and also the dangers of a little knowledge, and our instinct for survival. And then the phoenix rising, which is a mythological kind of picture, is also Scorpio energy. And that represents the process of transformation that's rising from the ashes. That's that whole idea of metamorphosis. People typically think of the butterfly, but, lots of instances of metamorphosis or transformation take place everywhere. And then there's the dove, which symbolizes the highest expression of Scorpio, which is that of awakening, enlightenment, ascension, and really the integration of our lower and higher natures. So Scorpio is very interesting, as you say, but for multiple reasons, and particularly where it's got those 3 sort of expressions of the scorpion itself, the phoenix, and the dove.
The dove was a new one for me, so I learned something new today. Thank you. Lilith, you know, astrologers, there are others that will talk about the black moon or black moon Lilith, but we talk about the asteroid Lilith. And I think we just really see the importance of talking about a physical object in the sky. I'm sure you'll talk about what Lilith means when it comes to the mythology of it. And because the moon moves so fast, they are on top of one another at the full moon in Scorpio. So intense energies. I'll let you lead.
Yes, and a conjunction between the moon and Lilith. In this case, the key word is that there's a triggering. So what is Lilith? In our view, there's the when some astrologers cast Lilith, they will use a point in the chart, like the ascendant. But we are talking, just to be clear, about the planet or the asteroid Lilith. So as you say, that's an actual planetary body rather than a point that can be cast on a chart. So with that clarification out of the way, most astrologers will steer away from talking about Lilith, but we don't, and I enjoy talking about her. And I've read 2 or 3 quite interesting books on her, the archetype, and her as a symbol and a myth in history. But the archetype of Lilith represents that of the independent woman. This is known in most texts and different versions of the story as Lilith was known also as the first Eve. So therefore she's surrounded in mystery, especially when in Scorpio. And occult practices. Now, occult is again misunderstood because it's been captured by witchcraft and so on, but really the basis of the occult is a pathway to enlightenment, and Eve or Lilith plays a key part in that process. She's often referred to as the dark side of the moon, representing the shadow aspects of the feminine, although I don't think that quite captures certainly the full picture. Eve or Lilith, the names are often interchangeable. You find that in history, and it's to do with the different cultures and the different stories that are told. But Eve/Lilith didn't actually, in one version, didn't actually cleave to Adam. She fled the patriarchal rule and the kind of the overlording of the masculine and the feminine. So she left that relationship, and that's part of what the story's about. So she's come to represent the feminine, the self-assertive and the confident feminine template. As the first woman, she's deeply embedded in the human collective historically and psychologically. And that's, again, we started with Scorpio as deep space or deep ocean, representing the metaphors of the outer limits of human experience and collective experience. So Lilith certainly is part of that as the first woman. And the idea or the archetype of Lilith is as the basis or the foundation of the relationship between the masculine and the feminine. She is wrongly defined in some contexts as a harlot and as disobedient. And our ideas and concepts of sin and salvation are obviously tied to the first Eve or Lilith, because she was the one in the Bible story who, of course, ate of the apple of the tree of knowledge, and everything changed from there. So this archetype, which is very complex and even more so when in Scorpio, is relating also to the ideas of disempowerment and sovereignty, and the battle that we have as humans to move into sovereignty and away from disempowerment, which is part of her story. This is why she left Adam. But even more so, Lilith represents the deep trauma that sits at the taproot of human consciousness that needs to be examined and observed and absolved, and really in Carl Gustav Jung and others had Lilith as one of their archetypes, and for Jung, Lilith represented what's called the anima, which is the inner feminine side of a man, and it's the archetypal image that exists in the male psyche based on it's just kind of there. So Lilith is, for all of those reasons that I've just provided, and that context of just provided, is clearly misunderstood, but her role within the astrological mosaic is very important, and even more so at this full moon in Scorpio.
Yeah, and I think there's distortion kind of goes hand in hand with quite a few parts of astrology. You know, there are many people out there that are just ignorant of the true position of the body, of the planetary bodies. And then when you tap into the stories behind all of them, there is so much distortion. It's quite sad and disconcerting when you have the time and are willing to dive into that. One of the archetypes, Pallas Athena, we have spoken about her many times, and I think with this one, people are just not aware of who she is, where she's come from, what she stands for. And we have spoken many times already, but can you please tell us again who she was and where?
Yeah, and just to recap, and the Scorpio moon, the moon is in conjunction with Lilith and Pallas Athena. So Pallas is one of our favorite archetypes in the 13th sign astrology. She's not necessarily related to 13th sign, but certainly we like to talk about her as a historical figure. She was highly revered in the Greco-Roman mythology, so on both sides. I think in one of them she was called Minerva, but Minerva and Pallas Athena are the same individual historically. What does she represent? What are her characteristics and attributes? Well, she was, in that Greco-Roman pantheon, a political strategist, which is a particularly interesting role for a woman, given how patriarchal those societies were. So she sat in the war room. She was an advisor and a counsel to military's high command, and she had a very prominent but unusual role in the affairs of state. To be there and to be effective in those roles, she had a highly refined mind. This is part of the archetype of Pallas Athena. She was emotionally intelligent. She had left-right brain harmonization, so she had that ability to use her whole brain, see things from those both the sort of the masculine left and the feminine right, or creative perspective. And she's really, if we look at the relationship between Lilith, who recognized the subjugation of the patriarchal system and decided to flee from that. What I didn't say before was that Lilith went off into the wilderness, and she's often associated, therefore, with that kind of gypsy, sort of instinctive, in touch with the land kind of energy. And I look at that and think, well, if that's the one way of dealing with the patriarchal authority figures, another way is sort of encapsulated or personified in Pallas Athena, who didn't run away from the patriarchy. She was like, almost, if you can't beat them, join them, but I'm going to outwit, and I'm going to use my skills and my savvy to operate effectively within this environment and to make change and to have an influence. As a result of that. So I called her an evolved and progressive form of Lilith, who actually came back from the wilderness. Pallas Athena was a force, therefore, to be reckoned with. And I guess in modern contemporary terms, she's the template of a female CEO or boss or kind of leader who's able to balance both professional and personal lives. also, historically, she was known as the patron saint of the arts, and so therefore she understood the real importance of creative self-expression and art, both as an outlet individually and collectively, but also as a marker of time. If we think about the great artists, the Michelangelos, the Da Vinci's, the whoever, I mean, there are so many of them, and there will be modern artists as well that I don't know their names, but they are a part of time and the fabric of time. So art isn't just about that expression, it's also about capturing the spirit of the age, I guess. So she was the patron of the arts. And I would describe Pallas Athena, therefore, as incredibly savvy and smart and collaborative and confident.
And she's been a big revelation for me during my first chart, and you and I have spoken about this at length, of where Pallas sits in my natal chart, which is in the 3rd house, which is all about content and communication. And my 3rd house is in Aquarius. So yeah, I really draw a lot from her strategic thinking and kind of being that female CEO, but for me it's and then incorporating Aquarius of the collective. So if you are wanting to know where your Pallas Athena sits, please make sure that you contact us, because I think the more we tap into those really strong feminine energies, we're able to be smart like Pallas and join the patriarchy rather than being subjugated by it. So let's change tact and we'll go to the other side of the chart. And I just want to let our viewers know that if you follow 12 sign astrology, it is the middle of May, 23rd of May, that we are recording this. And 12 sign would have the sun just going into Gemini. But if you use your stargazing app, or you cast a 13 sign chart, you will find out that the sun has only just moved into Taurus. So she sits, she sits at 9 degrees Taurus and making a close conjunction with Sedna. So Sedna, another feminine archetype. Please share the story that you spoke about in the beginning.
Yeah, looking at this in the way that I guess Source has orchestrated this particular full moon, incredible, with Pallas Athena, Lilith, and now Sedna, all in play. And, you know, most, as I said, most won't talk about this, but we're happy to shed some light on the role of these archetypes in the astrological 13 sign mosaic. Well, Sedna is a myth that's found in the Inuit or Eskimo mythology and folklore. The story of Sedna is that, like many of these feminine archetypes, they represent or give us insight into some of the difficulties that take place between the masculine and the feminine. And in this case, this is in the context of the relationship of Sedna, the daughter, to her father, who, as the story goes, the mythology goes, is that he married her off. He wished to marry her off. And that's not uncommon. Around the world, we have dowries and all sorts of things, and that's deep in European and Asian history about females being married off. So she was in that sort of category, and was therefore subjugated to her father's wishes. And it turned out that the man that he had chosen was a monster. And one day on a trip in the rough seas in the Arctic, of course, the Eskimo mythology is all relating to that Arctic region, and a trip on a boat, there was the daughter, Sedna, and the father and this husband, and he revealed himself for his true nature being a psychopath, a monster, an overbearing SOB, and is Sedna's father was horrified at this, and so they ended up in a fight on this boat. And it was rocking and rolling, and she fell over the side. So it's unknown in the story what happened to the father and the husband, but the focus shifted to Sedna, who plunged into the icy depths of the Arctic, never to be seen again. Well, supposedly anyway. So the idea of Sedna and the sea and the Arctic and the Eskimo mythology is that she, in their lexicon, their view, their worldview, is that she is the guardian over sea life, where there is an incredible amount of intelligence that exists. Of course, when we think of whales and dolphins and sea lions and birds, just as examples, but she is part of that. In that Eskimo mythology, she's part of that circular or symbiotic relationship that exists between the Inuit and the sea, and what I call eco-consciousness. And from what I've read, stories I've read, is that when the Eskimo are looking to harvest, they're looking for seals for the pelts or for fish from the sea. If they are unable to harvest, they recognize that they've fallen out, if you like, with Sedna. And so she is seen as a deity and who presides, it's her blessings that presides over the seas. And when we take that a little further, what we're really talking about here with Sedna conjunct the sun and Taurus is developing or having a deep awareness of the ecosystem that is the sea, and how it sustains life through the carbon cycle. And basically, as you said earlier, we operate, humans, that is, generally speaking, not everyone, but generally speaking, as a species, we operate in the dark, and we are ignorant of the impacts that we are having, especially on sea life. Humans are an apex predator, and Sedna's role in Taurus is to bring that awareness that we need to be in balance with nature, and in this case, the bounty of the sea, and to take stock in the way that the Eskimo mythology works, in that they have a much more, as I mentioned before, symbiotic relationship, and they understand that you cannot just simply plunder Gaia and the Earth's resources, and there's no price to pay. So Sedna is all in that consciousness lifting and consciousness raising part of the mythology, and she plays a key role here at this full moon.
I love her energy and all. It's quite interesting. I find that as we're all on different pathways of growing as a human, for us, for some, it's not that important, and for others, it's all we do. And then sometimes standing still and looking around and just taking stock where others are at. And I find that if we can do that without judgment, without having a tape measure or of I've already come this far and you're still standing at the starting line. I think if we can move forward as a society and lift each other up and hold each other's hands to really bring them together. We were talking about it was so normal for everyone to have the plastic bags at the supermarket. And now everyone here in New Zealand, they are banned. Now everyone has to bring their own reusable shopping bags. And that for me is part of looking after the planet that we lived on, just a very small part of it. But I think if we can help others by doing it the best that we can, and again, not having judgment for where your neighbor might be, hopefully nature will become more and more in balance, in Sedna and all the other beautiful archetypes that represent Mother Earth will be just as beautiful to us as we can be to her. Here's hoping. Indeed. Yes. So the next topic we will talk about is the Sun trine Pluto in Capricorn. And again, we've spoken about Pluto many times. There's been some beautiful events that happened in 1776, the last time Pluto was at the beginning of Capricorn. And now the Sun makes a trine with her there. So please share with us your insights.
Pluto, of course, is the guardian of Scorpio, so it's why we included this relationship between those two planets in this reading. So overall, and I mentioned at the beginning, that Pluto, or part of Pluto, is she symbolizes those power struggles. And in this context, we're talking about the power struggles that are personified or reflected or represented in the story of Lilith, or the first Eve breaking away from Adam, because that relationship in her view was not equal. We're talking about the power struggles that Pallas Athena, as an archetype, divine feminine or feminine archetype, represents, where she put on her, big girl panties, if you like, and took the whole system on it, and was revered and was excellent at it, as history tells us. And Sedna, who was in a situation not of her own making, where she was married off to a monster. So we've got, in all three of those archetypes of Lilith, Pallas Athena, and Sedna, we've got different versions of the story of the power struggles. And I think it's interesting, the power struggles in this case, or this context, being between the masculine and the feminine energies, of course, at a full moon, where you've got the sun on one side and the moon on the other side. I think it kind of all comes together and coalesces. And the sun, of course, trine Pluto, brings these concepts and ideas forward for us to ponder and to deal with. These ideas of the masculine, feminine, as I've just talked about, sit right at the taproot of the collective consciousness. And there are numerous divisions and distortions throughout humanity, throughout culture, throughout sport, throughout business, throughout politics. There are example after example after example of the power struggles between the masculine and the feminine. So Pluto here with the sun, of course, the sun is about confidence, self-expression, and being willing to explore these ideas, to deconstruct them, to unravel those emotional and mental knots for individuals and collectively. And of course, the Plutonic pathway, which we've talked about before, the Plutonic pathway to ascension involves three processes, which are very appropriate here. And it's to transmute negative frequencies or vibes. And we do that through conscious awareness, through becoming aware of a situation, is how you begin to transmute negative frequencies or vibes. And then from there, we can transform situations and scenarios. One technique to do so is to reframe. That's a typical kind of tell a different story. So if we've got some negative stuff going on, or some negative perceptions, or we're seeing some difficulties play out in some of these relationships between the masculine and the feminine, those negative vibes can be transformed by reframing and retelling those stories. But part of that will involve going back and understanding, well, why is it happening in the first place? And then, of course, the other part of that Plutonic pathway of transmute negative frequencies and transform situations and scenarios is to transcend self-limiting beliefs. And we do that through positive action. And the last thing I'll touch on with this, kind of as a wrap-up of Pluto and Scorpio, is that in my experience, it's practice that enables us to access those inner planes. I mentioned before that I thought that Scorpio, or I think that Scorpio energy exists in the pre-manifestation plane. So to get there, requires some form of practice, some kind of mindfulness and meditation practice, some of those modalities that give access to the inner planes where we still our busy minds. And there is lots of ways of doing that. Of course, there's music and frequencies, sound bowls. I particularly like listening to those. There's so many light therapies out there. There's mind-body exercises like yoga and Tai Chi, for example. There's emotional freedom techniques where you tap into the meridians and release blockages. But to really harness that Pluto Scorpio energy for our benefit is to utilize or activate some kind of practice, and the more often it's done, the better. And to me, practice unlocks our passion and unlocks our pathway and unlocks our purpose, because we're getting into the inner planes. We're going inward and listening to where source exists, where source speaks to us through our intuition, through our third eye, through our heart. So whilst that Pluto energy in Capricorn, the externalization of it is these power struggles represented in these three archetypes of Lilith, Pallas Athena, and Sedna, and of course the sun and the moon opposite at the full moon, the actual practical pathway to access some of that energy is, as I said, through a practice, a mindfulness or meditation practice, but also to be very conscious that there's sort of those three steps I touched on. Scorpio being the Scorpio, that kind of lower evolved, unevolved consciousness, transforming through to the phoenix rising and eventually the dove. That's kind of the ascension process. And to me, that is reflected in the Plutonic pathway, which is transmuting negative frequencies through conscious awareness, transforming situations and scenarios by reframing them or retelling the story, and transcending those self-limiting beliefs through positive action.
So much beautiful information there. Thank you. It's not always easy to go inwards. And I think society has made it near impossible for people to see the benefits of that, of going in, because it's like, oh, I want the new car, or I want that promotion at work, or I want to see the latest episode of XYZ. And we're just keeping our mind so busy. And by keeping it busy, you cannot hear source. You cannot go inwards and see where you're at as a spiritual being. And I've realized that for myself. And I don't know, for the last 3 or 4 months, I get up pretty much every morning before 6 o'clock, because if I don't have my practice done in the morning, I know that my day gets too busy. And I feel better for it. I feel my body is looser because I take that 15 minutes to do my stretches or strengthening exercises, and I write things out. And I'm nowhere near perfect in doing it every day, but I am definitely seeing the benefits now starting to come more and more. So I think it is a beautiful time with this nice relationship between the sun in Taurus, an earth sign, and Pluto in Capricorn, another earth sign, to really start a practice if you haven't yet already done so. And if you do have a practice, let us know in the comments what you do, how often, or if you want to share that with someone and kind of have an accountability partner if that is something that you're looking for. So let's close out this beautiful full moon reading so far already with just the final thoughts for now.
Yeah, good place to wrap this up. Full moon, as I mentioned earlier, is about those tensions between the sun and the moon, and there's just so many different descriptors for that: dark, light, masculine, feminine, head, heart, and push and pull. But the key with any full moon to navigate through it is to find the middle path. The apex between those two is the balance point, where there is perfect symmetry between the two sides. So that's the aim. integration and balance of any full moon, regardless of what signs it involves. However, Scorpio does symbolize the outer limits of individual and collective consciousness. We use the metaphors of deep sea and deep space, if you will. We talked about the Lilith being the feminine desire for self-determination and sovereignty. We talked about Sedna and the reminder, the symbol of what she is for us in the West particularly, is to tap into that circular nature of life, the eco-consciousness, I call that. Of course, Pallas Athena reminds us to be smart and savvy and strategic when dealing with adversity, difficulties, no matter what they are. And the Pluto or Platonic pathway to overcome these power struggles, these inherent power struggles that are everywhere, reflected in culture, reflected in as I said, business, sport. I mean, why is it that until recently females weren't allowed to be members of the Masters Golf Club? That sort of thing is ridiculous. But that still exists even in the 21st century, that type of scenario. These boys' clubs, these patriarchal structures are so outdated. And that's just one reflection of these deep tensions that go all the way back into really I would say the source code, because Lilith represents the Adam and the Eve, that schism, and there is different versions of that. In some versions she's the root of all sin. She is the original sinner, and and she's blamed. And yet in other versions that's actually about the female sovereignty and self-determination. So they are very different versions of events. So in order to overcome some of those dichotomies, those conflicts, those confusing and distorted messages, the Pluto, or the presence of Pluto, as you talked about and we touched on, is transmuting negative energies, transforming limitations and transcending beliefs. And finally, the confidence to push the outer limits of our experience. When we think about the metaphor of what are humans doing when we send a probe all the way out into deep space, and we want to go to Mars, we want to go to Jupiter, we want to go to Pluto, that requires superior technologies. And in the context of exploring Pluto with superior technologies, for us as humans having a spirit experience, we are talking, spirit having a human experience. Our superior technologies rest in our intuition, they rest in our imagination, and they rest in our extrasensory perceptions, which are all of those right brain faculties which are naturally associated with the moon and the feminine. So that's kind of how I see this.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening to our interpretation of this full moon Scorpio with the sun in Taurus. If you are interested in your own natal chart, you can purchase a chart from us or have a 2-hour natal reading from us. Both links are in the description. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram. We have a Telegram channel, and our blog or podcast is also available on Spotify. So thank you so much. And we shall see you with the next new moon reading. Thank you.
Bye now.